Well, I'm Allie from O2X, and I am excited to be joined by Maria Trozzi here. She is a leading expert in handling trauma, grief, particularly with families, children. She's been called into some of the biggest tragedies, but has helped so many different people. So we're really excited to be able to get some information from her to you, because I think everyone will benefit from hearing it on your best days and your worst. I think it's all useful information. So Maria, thank you for taking the time out of your day. I'm sure it's busy, but if you wouldn't mind giving a little bit more of an introduction, then I could even do it justice, and then we can get right into it.
For almost 30 years, I've been helping families, schools, communities, and large communities deal with all kinds of crises, from suicide to the marathon bombing, Katrina, Columbine, and of course, so much work that happened after 9/11, both in New York, but particularly in Boston, since Boston Medical Center and my program was really poised to be able to help the loved ones from the two planes that emanated from Boston. And I've learned a lot. Although honestly, pandemic this is our first and mine first too. And so I, take a pause here and say that this is like nothing else for a number of reasons. We're in the middle of it. It didn't happen, and now we're trying to sort it out. You can imagine Katrina had a sorting out for years. But the hurricane left, and then the process of healing started and repair. We're in the middle of it, and so I think that I've still applied some of what I've learned about crises to the pandemic. So I hope that I can be helpful to all of the first responders and their families.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head there when you're talking about we're sitting in the middle of this, which is pretty rare from anything I've been around for. It's usually there's an event or a catastrophic event, and then it's kind of done, and then you're processing through it. Mm-hmm. This is like we're sitting in it right now and kind of trying to manage fear and managing it, but also being really isolated while we're managing it. Particularly for first responders who maybe are isolating even from their families because they don't want to get their families infected, but they're also managing kind of having to go to work. What are some strategies or tips that you might share with them about that isolation piece of how to manage and kind of process through things on their own?
Well, of course, all of us are dealing with social distancing and isolating, and it seems to me it's almost a continuum. I'm actually in Florida as I speak, and I'm in a gated community right now, renting a little condo in a golf community, and half of the people in the community are still golfing. So they're not actually social distancing completely. So there's degrees of self-isolation, but there's nothing more isolating than really being quarantined and knowing that you are putting your family at risk when you are with them, because you are needing to be in the community. You are needing to take the tea. You are needing to be with coworkers to accomplish your goal. And that is an extreme isolation. What we know about isolation is it's powerful and it's awful. And again, everybody could do it if you knew that next Tuesday it would be over. Part of it is how long will we have to do this? And we've gotten some sense that the beginning is over. I want to borrow from Winston Churchill. I don't know how I bumped into this quote, but it's great. He said, I'm sure during World War II, this is not the end. This is not even the beginning of the end. But I think perhaps that this is the end of the beginning. And I feel we are there. And I hope that the first responders that can I speak to them, that they as first responders have found some kind of patterns that work. You use your coping strategies, and they're all different, to mitigate the effects of isolation. The internet is wonderful and awful, but boy, it is so useful now. I don't know how we would have done this. We're the only screen, a television screen 30 years ago. So knowing that you can connect by FaceTime is powerful. Do it often, and set a schedule for it so you can look forward to it. You need to create an agenda. If you are waiting to be deployed, if you have some free time, get up in the morning and actually make a schedule for yourself. It's helpful for so many reasons during normal times, but in a crisis, it just makes you feel safer. It makes you feel you have some, what we call psychologically, an internal locus of control. That is, I can't control when this is going to end. I can't control what I want to be able to do, but I can control my agenda. And there's something quite emotionally satisfying about that. And then talk about it. I've said many, many times, all the thoughts that are bumping around in your brain aren't helpful. Get them out. And if you can get them out by talking about it with a colleague, with a friend, with your family, that's great. No one understands it more than your coworkers. My daughter is a physician at Boston Medical Center, and certainly the doctors connect with each other so much around doing something that they were trained to do, to run, as you all do, towards the fire, to run towards the crisis. But this is extraordinary. This is extraordinary. And they talk about it. And in talking about it, it doesn't stir them up. It actually makes them feel acknowledged. So I suggest you do that as well. That's pretty much what O2X is helping you with today.
Yeah, I like that. I think between the schedule and connection are two things that keep coming up for people. And those are the two things that we hear isolation all the time. And then we hear like, no one's got routine anymore. So making sure that you're connected and making sure that you're on a routine of some kind.
And if you have the opportunity to schedule, so for teachers, for instance, not first responders, I'm very clear about there should be work, rest, and play. And when you're working from home and managing a family at home and working out of your bedroom or your kitchen, it doesn't feel as though you need the boundaries. You need them so much more. You need them so much more. We don't recognize it, when we get up, just the way we get up and we shower and we get ready for work and we get dressed for work and then we get in our car or go to the tea. All of this is regulating, and we don't have any of that anymore. So to be actually able to say, I'm working till 3, and then from 3 to 5, I'm going to, actually, I just was hitting golf balls on the driving range, not playing golf, but I just did that for 45 minutes because I needed to take a break from the work I have been doing since 7 this morning, and then I'll jump back in again. So I think knowing that I can look forward to a break is really helpful. The other thing, which we say all the time in O2X, is sleep is powerful. You can't cope if you don't sleep. So creating that agenda that allows you to say, this is the time I will work, after which I will not. The time I will play, whether that's hanging out with your friends through Zoom or Netflix or whatever it is that feels like it's a reward for you. And then, of course, rest. And boy, if you can capture that and create a rhythm with that, that really mitigates the isolation.
Yeah, that's I actually had to start a puzzle and do 10 pieces before I start work and after I finish work so that I have a buffer between work and not work, between
That's
my
great.
10 steps from my room to my home office here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think right now, because particularly first responders, they're kind of going to work with this stressor on their mind of not knowing if they've come into contact with coronavirus or if someone at the firehouse has it, and then the fear of maybe bringing it home if they have been exposed. What are some things that you might, and I think spouses also have a similar fear, right? Of they used to know that their spouse was going to work into danger, but not necessarily knowing they were, coming home and feeling like they were still stressed or still kind of riled up about the danger. What are some tips for families, whether it's the first responder themselves or the spouses and kids, of how they can kind of help manage the stress across the lines of home and work?
Yeah. The answer is a simple one to say, but a hard one to do. And it's to really check off every box about doing the right thing. Check off every box about doing the right thing. Take no shortcuts. And if you do it and your family members do it, then you're really, again, creating this locus of control. And it's an internal thing. That is, what can I control? I can wash my hands. I can wear my mask. I can try really hard not to touch my face. I'll be honest with you. The idea that I have the power over whether I touch my face is, for me, very helpful. It's not a slam dunk. My daughter says, Mom, it's not exactly true that, because you put your phone near your face. Okay. But in thinking that even if I have the virus on my hands, if I sanitize them and wash them carefully, and I don't put them near my eyes, my nose, or my mouth, I have some control there. And that helps me. So I think if we know we're doing everything possible, we leave our sneakers outside the room, outside the house. We strip. My children are both doctors. They strip in the garage and leave their clothes there, and they've got their routine. And their children just think it's the normal thing they do since Corona started. And they do it with regularity. It's part of the rhythm of caring for the sick. So I think if you look at it that way and say, how am I managing myself? And if you can check off every box that you're not slipping or cheating or kind of sliding what you're supposed to be doing, I think that that's very helpful.
Yeah, one thing as you're kind of saying that and not slipping, right, is right now we're in this like almost hypervigilance about washing hands and staying distant. And something that we've heard from some departments as we're starting to get farther from the start point of this and closer to what might be the end point, but that diligence and kind of that vigilance around taking care and the sanitation and precautions. I think something that we've heard is a bit of a uncertainty is that people are going to have a really hard time going back to routines, right? We've been in this new state of normalcy for long enough that certain things have become habit now that weren't before. But the fear is maybe how do people remotivate to go back to a normal schedule or
that's interesting.
what they're doing.
I have not heard that. I thought what you were going to say is people are getting a little sloppy with their
that too. I think that's part of it too,
because people are so done. I've talked with a lot of people this week, and what I hear is, I'm so done with this. I'm just so done with this. And what they're doing is they're making some compromises. And I get it. Some of the people I talk to live alone. And that's much, much harder than I have the opportunity to live with my husband. And I actually like him. So that makes it easier. But I've heard, well, we're all at Easter time. Well, we all gathered. And, in somebody's home. And then you hear as the story goes on, yeah, and we shared a dinner. So they basically stopped social distancing completely by sharing utensils and sitting at a table and all that. And probably 2 weeks ago, they might have just been sitting outside in the cold with each other 6 feet apart. So that's human nature. Like, I'm so done with this. The idea that we'll have a hard time reconnecting with our old routine, I doubt that's going to happen. I think that we'll have an appreciation for it in a way that that I couldn't have even imagined. But I think that I think what I worry about actually is there are some hidden gifts in when families have been able to slow down, find each other again in an emotional way, connect. I've heard so many parents say, my college kid being home, I haven't spent this much time with her, in 3 years. Because we all have to be under the same roof. What I think is that some of these gifts won't last, that we'll go right back to being overly busy and forgetting some of these wonderful connections that have been really gifts to us. It's interesting. I think that we'll never go back to where we were. It will be not even because of the virus. I think this changes lives. It changes the way we think about ourselves in a community. Whether we ever handshake again or whether for the next 6 months we'll all have to wear masks. And that's going to be a new adjustment as we begin to open up the country. wearing masks every place we go, and following some different sets of rules that will keep us safe. But I think Americans are great at, for the most part, following orders and saying, this is what I have to do for the public, for the sake of other people. So I feel good about that.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. In terms of anything that you feel like is particularly useful in your previous work and in, working with people who have dealt with, any number of things, what's sort of a, whether it's a mindfulness activity or something that, like you said, control is a huge piece. So what's like an actionable thing that someone might be able to start to implement to kind of take control over their stress in some ways?
Well, for certain, exercise is important. Any firefighter that's paying attention to this knows O2X. So I don't need to preach to the choir, but really moving our bodies is really important. Sleeping is really important. Human connection is really important. But I think that there was a question or two that you were asking me about before about considering the worst. And it's pretty hard, limiting media coverage for sure. But even if you just look at those numbers and, I understand that right now Boston still has not peaked in terms of its numbers. And so there's this awful feeling of worry and concern and being scared. It's normal to worry about that. It's normal to worry about if you have an older relative, a parent that is more vulnerable or has an underlying health condition. What happens if? And then we've heard these horrible stories about when people are hospitalized, they are not nearly as connected to the medical community as that you would like, because of course everyone needs to protect herself. It sounds awful. It sounds awful. So, normally I'd say when someone says, suppose this happens and then this happens and then this happens, that's called awfulizing. The truth of it is, if a loved one's in the hospital, it's not the way you would want it to be in the hospital where you can go visit. And there is even more isolation and, of course, fear. And so when you catch yourself worrying about this for a good reason, because you have a parent with an underlying condition or a grandmother who's 85, I think it's important to allow yourself to feel it. See if you can talk about it with somebody else and just say, I'm so worried and I woke up in the middle of the night just worrying about this. Sometimes it's helpful to write it on a piece of paper. Anything to get it out of your head. I call it the brain dump and the heart dump. Just move through it. Say it, talk about it, write it if you can. And then discipline yourself. I say to my patients, put it in a box, wrap it up, and in my office I say, leave it on my shelf, and we'll talk about it next week. So at least if it's a daily thing that you start worrying about, will Nana die, who does have COVID and hasn't been hospitalized because she doesn't have pneumonia yet, give yourself a few minutes to worry about it and then really wrap it up and say, I'm going to put it on the shelf. That is a fabulous coping strategy if you can do. It's really called compartmentalizing. And it's very powerful. It's not denying that there's a problem. It's not even denying the difficulty of the problem, but it's saying, I can do something about it. I can think about it. I can feel it. I can talk to somebody about it. But the worrying doesn't help her and it doesn't help me. So I'm going to discipline myself to put it on the shelf till tomorrow. Then I can take it off for 10 minutes as well. And I think that that's just good coping.
Yeah, that gets a little bit of like self-compassion almost, kind of giving yourself the capacity to cut yourself a break a little bit and recognize the challenge of the situation.
Ellie, that's a great that's a great idea. That is, I hear from so many different people, I'm not doing this well. I'm not homeschooling well enough. My child was trying to estimate, a second grader doing an estimating problem and threw the pencil across the room. I'm a failure as a parent. Boy, I'd love to just say, it would be lovely if you could teach your child, but no parent can teach your child. Done. You might be able to consult with your child about a spelling word, but to try to teach your child, and I was a good teacher for 7 years, many, many years ago. but I couldn't teach my children. There's a good reason for that. You know, teachers have this thing called peer pressure, this 15 or 25 children that kind of help each other know that I can't act out and throw pencils. But when you're in your kitchen, you can throw a pencil. And so when parents say, I can't do it. And this one particular parent is a single parent who was complaining about this and understanding. And she had 2 finals to take online the next day for her MBA program. And I just said, give it up, give it up. If he needs you to do estimating, then it's not the right assignment. Say, sweetie, you've tried your best. For now, we're just going to let go. I think you have to keep this isolation and homeschooling and all that it demands of us in perspective. We are doing this to save lives. So give yourself a break, cut him some slack. I really think it's wonderful if you can help your kids read each day and try to do the assignments that are there. But I think that we're asking much too much of ourselves when we ask ourselves to be great at maintaining a home and maintaining a family and worrying about our spouse and worrying about our children and then teaching them estimating. So we've got to kind of let this go and recognize why we're doing this. It's to save lives. We're in a crisis.
Yeah, I think that's a great point on perspective too, of that that idea that we are doing something for more than just staying home, and it really is for a bigger impact, and hopefully to help the first responders too. One thing I would like to kind of circle back on a little, you said awfulizing. Is that a term? What is some strategies? What are some strategies if you notice that your mindset is like into that kind of fixed negative mindset and you're snowballing into that pattern? What are some ways where you can maybe cue yourself, or some different things that you can do if you start to notice, like, oh, I'm spiraling way far down into the what ifs? How might you break that pattern?
Most of this happens when we're tired. Most of this happens at 3 a.m. when we wake up from light sleep. That is, we all, every 4 hours, wake up a bit and put ourselves right back down again. But when we're really stressed, this is when it pops up and we're now awake and we're obsessing. So no good happens at night. Remind yourself of that and say, I can think about this in the morning. I can worry about it in the morning. Again, compartmentalizing it and practicing shifting, taking a walk, doing some good breathing. Doing some really good breathing is a marvelous way, with a mantra if possible, to really shift yourself out of it. Probably it's the most effective thing you can do, is to give yourself 5 minutes of good mindfulness breathing. It will help that cortisol and adrenaline to just, and then you hopefully would try a different activity. And, we all worry. This is something, when there's a family member with a terrible diagnosis, you feel very much alone in that. But right now, this is a level playing field in many ways, and we all worry about it in terms of being a first responder with families. We're all in this together. And I think that that gives me some comfort as well. Yeah. I think that even though we don't know when the end is coming, we're beginning to think about opening up some of the restrictions we've had around isolation. And we can even imagine that if this continues and we do it well with really strong backed up metrics, we can imagine that there will be a day, and I can promise you there will be a day when we will not be walking around with masks, and we'll be out in the world and we'll be able to have more control of our lives. At that time is a perfect time for repair. So adding the word repair to our vocabulary is a great thing. That little guy that couldn't do his estimating work at 2nd grade, will be plenty of time for him to repair. And for us, not being able to be in some ways really, I think of people that are alone that aren't able to reach out and touch someone, there'll be a repair there. And I think it will be even more wonderful when there's a sense of normalcy. And perhaps we'll have learned something from this, hopefully, that might even inform our way of going. And all of that speaks to the notion of repair. And with any crisis, there's, of course, a physical repair at times, but there's an emotional repair as well. I was, after Katrina, I had the reason to be in New Orleans, I guess, for 9 years afterwards, off and on, because my daughter was in medical school and then a fellowship. And so there's a spirit about that community that is different from pre-Katrina. There's no question about it. Hearing Governor Cuomo talk about New York Strong, he's really referring to that wonderful connection that happened post 9/11. And I think that there's something about that that makes us feel connected and really more powerful, more strong, and more resilient. And I'm hoping that if we can keep the word repair in our heads, that there will be time for that. In many, many ways, I think that that's, it helps me. I hope it helps.
I haven't heard that before, but I think we do. Yeah, we end up spending a lot of time on the words resilience and the mindset and kind of positivity. But I think, yeah, that's I like that, framing it as repair, because there really will be a time where it's kind of
and
almost.
what I know about repair in terms of interpersonal relationships, it is in the repair that we get closer, and I hold on to that. You know, I do a lot of parenting seminars, and parents don't learn from when they do it right. They learn from when they make a mistake. And it's in that repair that they get closer to their child. And that's exciting for me to even think about. You don't make mistakes so you can get that good feeling. But when, in fact, we have to make a repair, there's something quite wonderful about it. You know, it's kind of like making up. You know, it just feels better. We're more connected. And Barry Brazelton, who's America's favorite pediatrician for many decades, taught me that. Maria, look for the repair. That's where the juice is. And I believed him, and I see it all the time in the work I do.
Yeah, that's great. We have a few mental performance specialists that talk about that as a productive failure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that's great. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate this a ton. Is there anything else that you kind of, before we close out, that you feel like we didn't cover that you'd want people to know? Or I think that you covered quite a bit, but I know there's always more.
You know, I think that acknowledging that this is a lot is helpful. And just, you know, trying to find the gratitude in small things. But this is a lot. And, you know, it's not about whining about it, but it's acknowledging that I'm being asked to do things that I'm not prepared to, that I wasn't trained to do. And I'm working at it every day. And I'm going to be successful sometimes and more successful other times, and really feel like a failure other times. But with practice, I will get better at it. And it's a lot. It's a lot. I think that's it.
That's good. And then the final question, which is, what is your 1%? Kind of what are you, whether it's today or this week or in the
I'm trying to get better with my golf drive.
Yeah. Good.
I mean that I'm not playing golf because we don't think it's safe, but I can do some putting and I can drive some balls. And so it's kind of my, I was thinking about it this morning right before I connected with you. And I just said, well, just think of it. If I hit a bucket of balls every day, by the time I go back to Boston, I'm going to be really better. So that's my 1%.
That's great. So that's a good little mindfulness activity in and of itself, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's right. It's nice being with you, Allie.
Yeah, it was great talking, and thanks so much. I think this will help a lot of people in some challenging times. So
yeah, that's right. Take care.